You can beat the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion using only Conjuration magic. You can beat it using only Restoration magic. Hell, you can beat this game using only Illusion magic. But one thing that I've never seen is Oblivion beat using only Mysticism. Unless of course there is indeed another small creator who's been absolutely buried by the algorithm that I can't find their video, because believe me, I've looked. Mysticism is a school of magic that was ripped apart by the angry vultures of the Skyrim Magicka schools, its corpse now left to rot in Oblivion. But if we're all completely honest with ourselves here, Mysticism is the least used magic school in Oblivion. Yes, you might use the occasional soul trap spell to recharge a magical item, and on the extremely rare occasion you find an invisible enemy, you might indeed use the life detect spell, and the actual useful Mysticism spells such as absorb or reflect magic are so far out of the player's grasp, require an insanely high Mysticism skill, have a crazy high magicka cost that can pretty much only be used by Bretons or High Elves in early game, and if you do put the time and effort to actually unlock these spells, they're so unbelievably lackluster and cannot even be enchanted onto your gear. In summary, Mysticism is terrible. Now that I've got your attention, permit me to disprove everything I've just said. So the rules for this challenge are quite simple. Rule 1 is that I can only use Mysticism magic. Rule 2 is that I'm not allowed to use any weapons, armor, or any aggressive skills. And Rule 3 is that I'm not allowed to use any cheats or console commands. Everyone clear and happy with the rules? No? Great, let's do this. So to start with, I created a High Elf character for a base Magicka pool of 200 and a base Mysticism skill of 15.
You are the one from my dreams. Then the stars were right, and this is the day.
God damn, this guy's a smooth talker. So this might be the quickest sewers that I've ever done in an Oblivion challenge, and that's because I can't really do anything right now. Mysticism is not a skill that is available to me until I choose my class, and I can't choose my class until the end of the sewers. This means I basically just have to let the blades kill anything for me, run past enemies when they leave me, and loot as much as I can. I meet up with Captain Uriel Picard again and choose the tower as my birth sign before following the blades through the rest of the sewers.
Damn it! The gate is barred from the other side! A trap!
It's a trap!
Then, like the great emperors before him, Emperor Uriel Septim dies, leaving the fate of the Empire to a half-naked prisoner and a son who doesn't know he exists. I choose the mage for my class because I only need Mysticism and I couldn't be bothered making a custom class, especially when Mysticism is the only thing I will be using. So choosing Mysticism as one of my main skills means that it now gets a stat buff up to 40. Still completely useless for now, but better than nothing. I run through the rest of the sewers, repeatedly casting Life Detect spell to increase my Mysticism as I leave. So the very first thing that I do upon leaving the sewers is fast travel to a place called Frostcrag Spire. I pick up a book giving me information on what I need to actually use this place. I then used one of the teleporters inside Frostcrag to teleport myself to the Anvil Mages Guild. After joining the Mages Guild, I looted all of their alchemy equipment and sold it back to them for a nice profit. I did this with all the Mages Guilds apart from Bruma because for some reason it still counts as stolen, and I sold all the junk that I'd collected within the sewers in the Imperial City before buying the Mage Tallow candles from the Mystic Emporium. I tried to make a reflect damage spell, however I currently don't have the required Mysticism skill. So I began to run about casting Life Detect to power level my Mysticism. I then slept to level up where I increased my intelligence, speed and put a point into luck. After a lot more power leveling, I headed to Skingrad to buy the superior spell reflect spell. I then headed to Waynon Priory to deliver the Amulet of Kings to Joffrey. I did this so that he would give me some assistance in the form of some supplies that I could sell, before finally heading off to Kvatch.
Go and see for yourself! Kvatch is a smoking ruin! We're all that's left! Do you understand me? Everyone else is dead!
Just calm down.
So it's at this point that I realised I didn't yet have a reflect damage spell. So I headed back to Frostcrag to create a reflect damage spell of 30% for 5 seconds on self. The Kvatch guard dealt with the scamps outside of the Oblivion Gate, and I headed inside to see for the first time if I could actually use Mysticism to beat this game. I could not. So I was forced to power level my Mysticism skill all the way up to 100, hoping that this would make things easier. I then joined the Fighters Guild with the sole purpose of looting any weapons from them so that I could sell them to get a bit of gold together. Once I had enough gold, I returned to Frostcrag Spire and created a reflect damage spell 100% for 8 seconds. Now the magicka cost of this spell is quite frankly alarming, however it was the best I could do right now. Also, I have a Kvatch guard with me inside the Oblivion Gate and the enemy seem to prefer to attack him, so I can either wait for them to kill him, or I can let him kill them. Eventually he died and all the attention would finally be on me. I now have exactly 8 seconds to ensure that the enemies hit me enough to kill themselves. I can use the wait command to heal, but this is going to be difficult because I will have to actually clear an area before I can do this. And while I have my reflect damage spell in effect, I'm theoretically invincible to normal attacks. The problem is that the enemy attacks will not be consistent nor constant, and in the event that they are still alive after the 8 seconds, I have to run about until my magicka is restored enough for me to cast the spell again. Another initial problem is that scamps will generally launch about 4 fireballs at you before they actually come up and attack you, so I have to dodge all of these attacks. Remember, I am a high elf and therefore very susceptible to magic. It's also theoretically possible to just run past all of the enemies. However, I really do need to ensure that the area is cleared so that I can use the wait command to heal, as I really don't have any other way of healing right now. Well, I do, but I forgot that I have potions. I actually had to leave the Sigil Tower so that I could try and regain some magicka with the scamps chasing me. Then I got killed. Then, remembering that I actually have potions, I used them to restore my health and magicka before returning to let the other scamps die on their own sword. Using the wait command to heal, I then proceeded to the next area and used my reflect damage spell again to take out one of the Drumora and the other scamp in the room. There is a fountain of health here, so that was useful. I met the Drumora Sigil Keeper, who looks like he spent most of his immortal life trapped inside a tanning bed.
Come on, I want you to do it, I want you to do it, come on, hit me.
After he was taken care of, I was able to loot the sigil key and make it up to the top of the tower without much trouble, taking the sigil stone. Now that I'd closed the Oblivion Gate, my next task was to fight my way through the chapel in order to meet Martin. Once again, everything seems a lot more interested in fighting the Kvatch guard than myself, so I effectively just had to wait for all the Kvatch guard to die before they would turn on me. Once again, magicka was a serious issue here, and I had to repeatedly run around waiting for my magicka to regenerate. After grabbing Martin, I returned to the Imperial City to find a bed so that I could level up. Now, I actually made it all the way to level 7, and since I'd only increased my mysticism, I was getting 5 points to intelligence every time I leveled up. I sold all the equipment that I'd collected inside the Oblivion Gate before taking Martin back to Joffrey.
The Amulet of Kings is gone. The enemy has defeated us at every turn.
Are you f***ing kidding me? You useless sacks of sh**. Not to worry, however, because we now have a plan. My first job is to fast travel to Cloud Ruler Temple to make sure that Martin is safe. I'm then tasked by finding my old friend Boris, who seems to be being followed by a Mythic Dawn agent. The Mythic Dawn agent pays no attention to me, and so Boris was forced to kill him. At which point we were able to retrieve the first part of the clue, Manka Cameron's Commentaries, Volume 1. Then, after speaking to Tarmina and making a reflect spell 100% for 9 seconds, it was off into the sewers with Boris to discover the location of the Mythic Dawn Shrine. There's not really much to say about our trudge through the sewers because once again most of the enemies seem to prefer to attack Boris. I would get the occasional rat or mud crab to attack me, at which point I could use my reflect damage spell, but apart from that nothing really much happened. I told Boris that I would meet the sponsor and waited for him to attack me, at which point I used my reflect damage spell and waited for them to die on their own swords. Because I now have a lot more magicka, I can actually get away with casting the spell twice, effectively giving me 16 seconds of immunity. I got some really expensive loot from his corpse, as well as the next book of Manka Cameron's commentaries. After heading back to Tarmina and waiting 48 hours, we had finally discovered the location of the Mythic Dawn Shrine. I sold all the expensive equipment that I had and used the money to buy a lot of health and magicka potions. I then headed off to the Dawn Shrine to speak to Harrow. You get given an option here whether to put on the robes and give him all of your equipment, or you can choose to just kill him. I actually did have to use a few of my Restore Magicka potions just to get through Harrow. You know, it's just occurred to me this could also be a can you beat Oblivion without attacking anything challenge. Now all of the Mythic Dawn are hostile to me, so I'm going to have to make sure I clear them all out. This is because it is necessary for me to use the wait command in order to heal. Well, I mean it's not, but I don't want to waste too many potions right now. However, the sheer number of enemies in the Mythic Dawn Shrine made this extremely difficult. I actually got killed a few times here. And that's because the Mythic Dawn agents can also use a powerful magicka spell, and I am severely weak to magic. I do have a Reflect magicka spell, however, it will use all of my magicka for just one spell for 9 seconds. I began relying on Restore Health and Magic Potions quite a lot, which I was not happy about, but I would have to ensure that the shrine was as cleared as possible before I got to the Mysterium Xerxes. And if you're wondering why I don't just use a Reflect Health and a Reflect Magicka spell, it's because the Magicka cost is far too great. This shrine was an absolute cluster of acolytes, spells flying, dying repeatedly, rinse and repeat. It actually got so bad that I had to try and find a way of fighting one enemy at a time, trying to lure them into a secluded area where they could hit me until they died, and then use the wait command, go back and try and lure the next one out. After making it to Manka Cameron, I decided to hide, letting all the acolytes leave before I went down to try and get the Mysterium Xerxes. So I was actually able to use the Reflect spell that I have to take out one of Manka Cameron's children. However, this left me with very little health and very little magicka, and there are a lot more enemies in the room. I didn't know this at the time, but apparently there are. You see, there is another Mythic Dawn guard that I was able to use a Reflect damage spell on, at which point he was hitting me, but then I ran out of magicka, so I had to run around for a little bit until I had enough magicka to use my spell again to finish him off. Simple enough so far, but then I got sneak shotted with a lightning attack. I have no idea where this came from. I then learned that some of the Mythic Dawn acolytes actually returned to this area, so before I dealt with that guard, I would have to head upstairs and take out the Mythic Dawn acolytes one at a time as they came back. I was then able to fight the guard that I dealt with previously, using my Reflect spell on him, and then running about until my magicka had regenerated, before finishing him off with Reflect damage. And then, at long last, I had acquired the Mysterium Xerxes. Getting out of here was just as difficult as getting in. I felt that I once again had to clear the way through the Mythic Dawn Shrine. You don't actually have to do this, it is possible to run past all of the enemies. However, because I can't really heal in a conventional way, it is much safer to just try and take them out one at a time, using my Reflect damage spell, finding an area to rest and recover, and then moving on to the next one. It was a very long process. I died a lot of times on the way out and used a lot of potions. This really was a test of patience. Now, it's certainly more efficient to deal with many Mythic Dawn at once because your Reflect spell will hurt all of them as they attack you. However, once you run out of magicka, you're completely f***ed. I know I said earlier that I'm theoretically invincible, but the word there is theoretically. I am far from it. And finally, after a long grueling slog through the Mythic Dawn Shrine, I finally escaped. After returning the Mysterium Xerxes to Martin, he says that there are a few items required for a mysterious ritual that he is going to need. But before all that, I have to take out some spies located around a runestone near Bruma. It seems that they're spying on Cloud Ruler Temple. I took out one with my reflect damage spell, and then instead of going into the house, I actually went backwards through the cave, killed the other spy, and took the battle plans. Apparently, Mehrunes Dagon is planning to attack Bruma at some point. So now I'm going to need a Daedric artifact, and normally I only hit level 2 and I'm forced to take the Azura Star. However, I am actually level 7 and so I do have more options available to me. I think I might have actually been able to take out Umbra with these Mysticism spells. However, I just decided I would go for Azura anyway because it seemed like the quickest and easiest thing to do. I got absolutely f***ing destroyed by the first vampire, and I thought the game had glitched because my reflect spells weren't doing anything. So at this point I realised that she'd actually silenced me. So I had to try again, this time casting my reflect damage spell before I engaged in combat. This is not efficient as it wastes a bit of time, and I was ultimately forced to reuse the spell, draining what was left of my magicka. Also, once I killed the first vampire, another one appeared right behind her, so this was going to be hard. My plan then was to simply just run away and let my magicka regenerate, and then cast the spell again to finish off the next vampire. I think I got lucky here because it's in a closed confined space with not a lot of movement, so I was able to near enough deal with one vampire at a time. I mean, it certainly wasn't pretty and the running around was nothing short of cowardice, but the job is getting done. Albeit very slowly, I did indeed get sneak attacked once again, and so was forced to bring one of the vampires to the entrance to this cave, take them out, and then use the wait command to heal. Now, this next part I didn't think of, and it's quite interesting. You see, in Oblivion, different enemies have different levels in respect to your own character's level, and some of them can be quite overpowered in their own attacks. But this also means that I can reflect their own overpowered attacks back at them. In short, the harder they hit, the easier they fall. I'm pretty sure there's a famous quote that's something along those lines, but this most certainly worked to my advantage. Stronger enemies mean they die easier. I died against one of the vampires because she seemed to be exclusively using magic. I then tried again with the reflect spell that I have, only to find that 2 vampires were now attacking me. I eventually managed to get the sorcerer on her own, where I killed her with her own magic, and used my reflect damage spell on the last vampire, taking him out as well. Now that all the vampires were finally dead, I returned to Azura and claimed the Azura Star. After returning to Martin and Joffrey once again, it seems there's a new threat. An Oblivion Gate has opened up outside of Bruma. Although this is not the big one that is yet to come. I have to travel with Captain Bird inside the Oblivion Gate and show him how to close it. Now, Captain Bird is an absolute powerhouse, and I'm surrounded by Bruma Guard. They will all die, however, Captain Bird is invincible. Also, a lot of the enemies just seem to prefer to attack Bird. I am completely okay with this. However, some of the enemies actually did attack me, and so, for the first time in I can't remember how long, I was actually able to help Bird inside of this gate. I can still use the wait command to heal, which will also heal my magicka, and use my reflect damage spell on anything that dares to attack me. This gate is actually very straightforward. It's just a case of make it through to the sigil room and collect the sigil stone. Now, don't get me wrong, without Captain Bird this would have been extremely difficult. But you don't actually have to kill any of the enemies. You only have to make sure that Captain Bird is with you in the sigil stone room when you collect it, showing him how to close Oblivion gates. And with the immediate threat neutralized for the time being, my next job is to acquire the blood of a god. It's suggested that I head to an old Blades tomb known as Sanctor in order to collect the armor of Tiber Septim. Grave robbing. Got it. My initial plan was to take out all of the skeletal enemies around Sanctor so that I could leave and use the wait command whenever I wanted to heal. However, at my level, I am now dealing with much higher level skeletal guardians. I took out some of the enemies before just saying f it and headed inside Sankator to see what awaited me. Now, Sankator is absolutely swarming with ghosts, but they're not my primary objective here. My objective are the 4 undead blades. Also, my reflect spell does nothing to these ghosts because effectively they are immune to frost damage apparently. So I would have to ignore them and head for the primary targets. Unfortunately though, the undead blades do not do as much damage as I would like. They're also quite slow, which means that my reflect damage spell will run out quickly and then I'll be fucked. So my plan then was to lure one of the undead blades to an arrow trap located near the start of Sankator. Hopefully I could use this to kill him. Okay, let's just try that again. Maybe one more time. See, I was able to use my potions to near enough get all of my health and magicka back, at which point I would have to find a way of keeping him within the area of the arrow trap so that it would kill him. However, on the odd occasion that it did, a ghost would finish me off. This was absolutely infuriating. On my final attempt, I was actually able to kill him and escape with just a slither of health. However, by this point I'd exhausted nearly all of my potions, and I wouldn't be able to do this with the rest of the blades. I was actually able to get far enough away from the enemies to use the wait command to heal, before trying to take on Warden Kastav. Now, you don't actually need the key from him, however there is a hard lock that you will have to get through if you don't kill him. I decided that killing him would be a waste of my resources, and so I picked the lock, making it through to the next blade. So I put up a very good fight against the next undead blade. You see, I was reflecting my damage back at him. Everything was okay. Even a few of the ghosts were actually hitting him, which was helping. Eventually, however, I did run out of health and magicka, and so I was forced to run away as they chased me down the corridor. They're a lot slower than me, and I was able to get my magicka back and finish him off with a reflect spell. Of course, then the ghosts hit me, and I had to start the whole fight again. On my next attempt, running away was actually not necessary. You see, I have quite a few magicka potions that I was able to use to regenerate my magicka and then recast my reflect spell. It took quite a while and the ghosts were hitting him, but it got done. However, the first 2 blades were very difficult and I am now out of potions. So I was forced to actually leave Sankator and head all the way back to Coral. From there, I could use the wait command to heal and buy more potions from the Imperial City. Returning with enough potions, I began my fight against the 3rd blade. I used my reflect damage spell as always. I managed to get 2 out of it before I had to start using potions. I used a lot of potions. Like, seriously, a lot more than I was comfortable using. After I'd finally killed the 3rd one, it was time to deal with the last blade. I made it to him with not a lot of health left because I was being repeatedly attacked by ghosts. And this is where I noticed something interesting, something that I hadn't really thought of until now. You see, some enemies will have enchanted weaponry that will do magicka damage, so if I was to use a reflect weapons spell, then I would still take magicka damage. I got very lucky here because the way that the blade in front of me is positioned with the ghosts behind him, the ghosts were actually attacking him, trying to attack me, therefore dealing him damage. I also had enough potions to keep myself alive with my reflect spells. With the 4 undead blades finally defeated, I made it through and took the armor of Tiber Septim. Making it back to Martin, he has yet another job for me. This time he wants me to infiltrate an ancient Ayleid ruin called Miskarkind and retrieve a great Welkid stone. Now, Miskarkind is long and maze-like, and it's always a funny one because I never really know how it's going to play out. You see, there are zombies and skeletons, as well as goblins inside of this ruin, and they fight each other. Like, seriously, you can stand back and watch them kill each other, and then finish them off. The goblins in here were quite annoying because they don't actually deal a lot of damage, which meant in a lot of cases, I was using more than 2 reflect damage spells, which meant running about trying to regain magicka. The zombies, on the other hand, are excessively easy to kill. This is because they deal extreme amounts of damage that can be reflected back at them to kill them without any trouble. The skeletal guardians, however, they were annoying. It was actually really fun to fight the zombie guardians because they were dealing back so much damage to them. Did he just shut the f***ing door on me? Oh hell no, he's gonna die for that disrespect. By the time I made it through to the Great Welked Stone, I was in a really good place. I had plenty of health and potions, and things were going well. As soon as you take the Welked Stone, the King of Miskarkand will appear, and steps will rise up from the ground as well, allowing access to zombie guardians that will try and kill you. However, as we've already learned, they are both slow and very powerful, therefore extremely easy to kill. I made it a priority to deal with the zombie guardians first. Then I ran around for a little bit until my magicka had regenerated enough for me to take on the King of Miskarkand. I used a reflect spell, if that's grammatically correct. And you know, he does a reasonable amount of damage. I did actually have potions of sorcery to regenerate my magicka, so it was simply a case of just use my reflect spell and wait for him to die, taking the key and getting the hell out of there. So the last item on our shopping list is to acquire a Great Sigil Stone. In order to do this, I would have to allow a Great Gate to open outside of Bruma, enter it, and then take the Sigil Stone. Now this is actually a timed quest, which means you can fail. After about 14 or 15 minutes, Martin will be killed and you will lose the game. Therefore, I always feel like fighting is not exactly encouraged here, it's just get through the tower as quick as you can. Avoid all enemies if possible. Also, I would have to rely on health potions here, as using the wait command is not an option. I did, however, have to fight a few Dremora, specifically the Sigil Key Keeper, so that I could get the Sigil Key and actually make it through to the Sigil Stone. And with that, there was nothing left to do but grab the Sigil Stone and get the hell out of there. I then returned to the Imperial Market District and sold everything I collected so far, using the money to buy a lot of potions. Upon entering Manka Cameron's paradise, I wanted to clear out as many of the scamps and clan fears and such as possible. This did, however, prove to be far too time-consuming and difficult, so I said f*** this and headed through to Kvatch.
My kin, say you fought well.
Jesus Christ, this guy sounds like he smoked 40 a day since the day he was born. It is at this point that we're given a crossroads here. We can choose to kill him, or we can choose to serve him. Now I know that he has a sword that does fire damage, therefore he will absolutely wreck me. If I use reflect damage, then he will kill me with fire damage. If I use reflect spell, he will kill me with normal damage. Therefore, I was just going to have to serve him. After freeing Anaxes, he gave me the Bands of the Chosen and I made it through to the next area, where I met a Mythic Dawn defector named Eldermill. Now, he will help me get through this next area, however, you don't actually have to fight anything. He will, however, remove the Bands of the Chosen, which is necessary to get through to the last area of Paradise. And Manka Cameron's children killed the rest of the enemies that were tracking me up till now, giving me free reign to use the wait command to heal, and finally fight Manka Cameron. Okay, so let me just start by saying that this fight was an absolute mess. For starters, Ruma Cameron did not get involved in the fight at all. Over the several attempts that I made at this, she did not once get involved in combat. Also, his other child, Raven Cameron, would periodically forget that I existed and only attack Eldermill. Once Eldermill was killed, he seemed to just give up on me, allowing me to fight Manka Cameron alone. This really helped. On one of the attempts I had, Manka Cameron seemed to just stay at the level above me, not really doing anything, and I'm pretty sure he was repeatedly striking the ground trying to get me, but his children weren't getting involved, so I had time to think of a strategy. Eldermill did keep getting killed, but this was okay because he was doing quite a bit of damage to Manka actually. Eventually, Manka Cameron's staff either stopped working or ran out of charge or something, because he came at me with his fists. This was a perfect opportunity to use my reflect damage spell. However, by this point I'd already used all of my magicka potions, so this was going to be a very long and difficult process, especially when Eldermill would reappear and then Raven Cameron would jump back into the fight. In other attempts I was actually able to damage him using his own magicka, using my reflect magicka spell, and this was working quite well. However, he just kept healing. This was a viable strategy, and it was one that was working. However, I just did not have enough potions. And so I thought, you know what, f it, I've come this far, and I could have done this if I had enough potions. I really didn't want to do Manka Cameron's Paradise all over again, so I just dropped the difficulty and watched him die, taking the Amulet of Kings. And finally, there was nothing left to do but get Martin to the Temple of the One and beat the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion using only Mysticism. So first of all, I'd just like to say thank you for following me on this journey, if you made it this far. So this is a challenge that I've had in mind for quite some time now, but wasn't really ever sure exactly how to do it. And I thought it was a really fun and hopefully interesting avenue to explore with this game. I really hope that you guys did enjoy watching this challenge as much as I enjoyed playing it. Please do let me know in the comments what you thought. I do appreciate all feedback given, both positive and negative, as it does help the channel. And finally, I'd just like to say thank you so much for watching today. Please like, subscribe and all that good stuff. Leave any comments if you do have any. And I will see you guys next time. Take care.